this last group of folks are coming in, my name is Bob King. I'm the president of the Council on Post-Secondary Education, and it is my responsibility and pleasure to welcome you. This conference is something that was put together and dreamed up by folks on our staff. When they did so, they made a commitment that we would invite 150 of our closest friends from across Kentucky, and I understand that we failed at that, and that there are close to 300 who are signed up and here to participate in the events today and tomorrow. We are delighted that you are here. I saw on the agenda that there is a dinner this evening. Not quite sure why. There's something else happening this evening. For those of you that happen to live in the state of Kentucky, as some of you may know, I'm a relatively newcomer to Kentucky. I've been here now a little over 3 years, and I have to tell you that I continue to be amazed by the attention that falls on our basketball teams. I'm a big sports enthusiast, so I'm not at all offended by that, but I wanted to share with you, I was at the dentist about 3 weeks ago, just as the NCAA tournament was starting, and I had my teeth cleaned, and I come out, and you know, most dentist office, at least mine, has a relatively small waiting room, and I get out there, and there's this young woman who's the receptionist, and she's seated behind a desk, and there's another woman, probably in her late 30s, I would guess, and she seems to be attending to a much older woman who's there in a walker, probably in her late 70s or early 80s. And as I kind of stumbled into this conference that was going on in the waiting room, it turned out that the 80-year-old was lecturing to the two younger women on her speculation about the strategies that John Calipari would be using during the tournament, and she actually knew what she was talking about. And I sat there, and I walked out, and I said to myself, only in Kentucky. But it has been a great couple of weeks, and for those of you that saw the game the other night, regardless of which team you were rooting for, I think both teams played remarkably well and did Kentucky proud. And we will assure you this evening, for those of you that might have an interest in the championship game, that we'll get you out on time to be able to don your paraphernalia and get to whatever sports bar you intend to visit to watch the game. I wanted also to do a couple of things before I start. Probably the most important is among those who are here are two of my bosses, the chairman or chairwoman of our board, Pam Miller, and one of our board members, Donna Moore, and we are delighted. Stand up for a minute. Thank you so much for joining us. As you may know, our board is made up of volunteers who are appointed by the governor and approved by the Senate, and I have to tell you that it has been an absolute pleasure for me, and I think everybody on our staff, to work with these terrific people and their colleagues. It's been a great experience for us and people who really care about higher education. My job is to spend a few minutes talking to you, maybe a little bit of an overview of why we're here. We have a PowerPoint, and if I can figure out how to do this, look at that. What I want to tell you is that through a lot of work that was done over the last year, it's now going back, we completed the work last spring, but work that was undertaken by members of our council, by our staff, by representatives from all of our universities, both public and private, as well as people from the Economic Development Cabinet, the State Department of Education, the Workforce Development Cabinet, the State Chamber of Commerce. We were able to develop a new strategic agenda, which is the guiding document that the statute that creates our office obligates us to create on a 4 or 5 year cycle. And that document has, frankly, a fairly simple vision and mission, which you can read there. And it really is all about making sure that the people that come to our institutions, whether they are community and technical colleges or our four-year institutions, leave our institutions prepared to succeed in this new and very competitive global economy. There are four pieces to the strategic agenda. One is college readiness. Two is student success, which is what this conference is all about. Three is attention and focus on research, economic and community development. And fourth is doing all that we do as efficiently and cost-effectively as possible, and using as much innovative activities as we can to control the cost of education and improve the quality of our product across the spectrum of our institutions. I want to talk about two of these in particular. First is college readiness. For decades, higher education too often has been shaking its finger at K-12 and saying, you know, you're not sending us students who are very well prepared. We have chosen to take a different approach, which is to say that when we look across the spectrum of our activities and our obligations to our students, one of which is to get them graduated, is we know that students who enter our institutions underprepared, in need of remedial education, graduate at half the rate of the students who enter our institutions ready to take credit-generating courses. And so we made a decision in the context of this new strategic agenda to stop shaking our finger and blaming K-12 and saying, what can we do in higher education to help K-12 succeed, because their success will translate into our success. And so we looked at what we do, one of which is preparing teachers, and recognized that we really are the gatekeeper for the entire system of public education, because we decide at our institutions what students come into our teacher education programs. We decide what to teach them, and we decide what they have to demonstrate in order to earn our degrees and qualify to go out into the workforce. And so in a very real sense, because teachers are 95% of what K-12 is all about, that we really are the gatekeepers of that system, and the quality of our graduates who are going into the teaching profession are something that we can influence quite directly. The other is how we support teachers once they're out in their careers, and how higher education can play a role in developing new and effective and relevant professional development to support teachers throughout their teaching experiences. And so while there are a number of other things, I just wanted to highlight how this changes the equation and says that we in higher education will shoulder part of the responsibility for making sure that K-12 is successful. And all of this is now being demonstrated through the work that is going on in our campuses and the work that's going on in K-12 collaboratively with us around the implementation of new Common Core standards. I will stop there because there's far too much to talk about, and I could rattle on for a long time. But want to move now to student success, which is what this conference is all about. We have in our strategic agenda not just the objectives that we want to fulfill, but a bunch of metrics, measures to determine whether or not we are fulfilling these objectives. And I have to tell you that the metrics all connected to student success are largely quantitative. How many new degrees and credentials did we award? What was our graduation rate, and are those rates improving? Are we closing achievement gaps in terms of graduation rates of students who enter prepared and those who enter underprepared, those who are middle and upper income versus those who are low income, and those who are in underrepresented minorities versus the majority students on our campuses? But all of this is quantitative. The real question, though, is not whether we graduate students, in my mind, although that's obviously important. It is, what do they know when they graduate? What are the qualitative aspects of our work? And is there a way to measure that? It's something that we in higher education have perhaps not paid as much attention to as we should, or sometimes rather avoid answering that question. I got an email Thursday from a fellow who works for our office. He's here today. His name is Tom Martin. He's sitting over here somewhere, right over there. Tom was invited to visit the General Electric manufacturing facility here in Louisville. And what he learned on that visit was quite interesting to me and to him, interesting enough that he put it in an email. He said what he learned is General Electric has now, over the last several years, or coming in the next couple of years, going to invest over $1 billion in that facility. And they are reversing course in this respect. They are insourcing jobs, bringing them back from China and Mexico, which is awfully good news for Kentucky. He put it that way. He said, here's the good news. He said, but here's the bad news. When they are doing their hiring, particularly for industrial designers, which are important to their work, they are not looking to our institutions for those new employees and those new interns, and instead are going to Arizona State and Cincinnati and Illinois and Purdue. So the question is why? The answer is that they are not confident that we are producing people with the skills that they need. That's not to say we're not producing people with skills, but it would seem to me one of our responsibilities ought to be to support the industries and employers that are here in our state. They're looking for people who can conceptualize, solve problems, and communicate effectively. When I go around the state, I often meet employers, and in doing so, ask them, are you hiring our graduates? And if so, what are you finding in terms of meeting your expectations? There's a company called Alltech, some of you may be familiar with. They do some marvelous stuff in the area of biological related products, a lot of work around algae and stuff like that. Very sophisticated. They hire our students from our universities, but they say they're pretty good technically, but they are very weak in their ability to communicate, both in writing and orally. And so hearing these stories from our employers is one way of evaluating the quality of our work. There's a study that many of you may be familiar with called Academically Adrift. It was published last spring, and the headlines about this study were all about some evaluations that they did across, I think, 30 different colleges and universities, large and small, public and private, selective and not so selective. And the headlines were that there was serious concern that there was little evidence students were learning much between when they entered their institutions and by the end of their sophomore year. I wasn't very impressed with the headlines, and obviously it was very troubling to any of us who were in higher education. But I went and I got the book and I read it. And actually there's a much deeper set of messages there. And again, it comes to this issue of quality. And I thought that I would extract and put up on the screen this particular quote, which I thought was rather important. It was toward the end of the book. They were talking about what they think it will take to keep more students enrolled, and in keeping them enrolled, getting them to graduate. It was not so much a focus on all of these extraneous things, which are important, obviously, in terms of student activities and advising and the like, but rather it was their view that if students are learning and engaged and challenged, they will likely stay enrolled and graduate. Part of their finding was that when students were leaving, it was in part because they didn't feel they were getting much for the tuition that they were paying. There's an evaluation in the study that talks about how students spend their time. The blue, which is the 9%, is the amount of time they spend attending class. The red, 7%, is the amount of time they spend studying. The green slice is the amount of time they spend working, volunteering, participating with fraternities or sororities, or in student clubs. And the balance of their time is spent sleeping at 24% and socializing at 51%. I have found over the years that I think out of a sense of benevolence, when students come to our campuses, we often encourage them not to take 15 credit hours in a semester because it's just too much work. And in fact, the default has become 12 credit hours, I think in large part because that's what it takes to become a full-time student for purposes of getting a Pell Grant. Our data tells us that the average student in Kentucky at a public university earns 25.5 credit hours a year, an academic year. You can't graduate in 4 years at that rate. And so this graph would suggest that our students have the time, if we will challenge them more substantially, to take more courses and to spend more time studying and doing the things they ought to be doing. And that's not to say that socializing isn't important, but as you can see from this analysis, they could probably do a little bit less of that and a little bit more of why they're at our institutions. One other anecdote. I participate with the State Chamber of Commerce on their board of directors, and they had a meeting recently at which the chief executive officer of Kentucky's fourth largest employer, a company called General Cable, spoke to us. And the CEO from General Cable described their company. I'd never heard of them, and I originally thought that they must be a cable television company. They're not. They actually manufacture the very sophisticated transmission cables that are used to move electricity all over countries and continents. And the CEO said to us, he said, we have 7 factories, 1 here in Kentucky and 6 in other countries. And he puts a map up on the screen, and the other countries where their factories are located are countries you would have never expected. Countries that just a decade ago we would have thought of as third world nations. And he said, we made a decision at our company that we would only build facilities in other nations if we could be assured that we could get the same quality of work and the same productivity that we get here in America. Well, they have 6 facilities in these other countries that we would have thought of as third world. And they are getting the same quality and the same productivity and getting it for a fraction of the price. And so when he got done, I raised my hand and I said, I have a question. Is there anything we could do to persuade you to invest more here in Kentucky? And a 10-minute, very polite answer essentially was no. Now, what he was describing was this reality, that as the rest of the world is catching up to America in terms of educating their population to very high levels, and no longer just taking low value-added, unskilled jobs, but now taking high value-added, high-skilled jobs, and doing it for a much lower price, that companies that have business all over the world are going to be drawn to where they can get quality and quantity at the best price. So the pressure on us could be to lower our price, which means to lower the standard of living of Americans. Or it could be to rebuild that premium of quality that was once the hallmark of American ingenuity and American industriousness. It means producing students from our institutions that are more innovative, more productive, better problem solvers than any other country in the world. Because it's only through that capacity that we're going to be able to retain a standard of living that we have come to appreciate and enjoy. It is building that premium to justify investment here that I think will be the long-term solution, and that's why what you're doing here at this conference is so important. One other piece of data from this study, 83% of freshmen and 51% of seniors, according to Academically Adrift's analysis, had not written a paper longer than 20 pages in the academic year that the study was undertaken. Even at the top 10% of schools, the most selective, 33% of seniors had not written a paper longer than 20 pages in their final year. And 30% of college students had not taken a course in the previous semester that required 40 or more pages of reading per week. So if you go back to that little pie chart in terms of how kids are spending their time, part of this is saying to us in higher education that we need to challenge them more. We need to give them more work, not less, and to get time on task, whether it's writing, whether it's reading, whether it's working in our laboratories. All of these things will make a difference to improving student success and helping these students be competitive in an increasingly competitive 21st century global economy. So with that, I am grateful to have these few minutes to talk to you, and I hope to challenge you to use this time together to assure that we can elevate the knowledge and depth of understanding of our graduates and make them the valued employees and entrepreneurs and citizens that will serve this Commonwealth in the years and days ahead. With that, please welcome my partner in crime, a great academic leader in our state, Aaron Thompson.
Thank you, President King. Good morning. God, good to see you, folks. Let me tell you, 150 people, you look like a lot more. It's great to see the energy that's going around this subject matter. I know many of you, as a matter of fact, it makes me think that I'm not as young as I used to be. I think I know most of you over the last many years. I'm proud to be a Kentuckian. I'm proud to be a part of the great institutions of Kentucky. As a matter of fact, there is something going on this evening. We're going to start our speaker a little bit early, and we can have a great dinner, and we'll still have plenty of time seeing that team from Lexington win a championship. I'm so happy. By the way, I was out of town this weekend, so I know this looks like North Carolina blue, but really it's the only blue in my wardrobe on my trip, Kentucky blue. I am clearly anxious to see this game. All you folk in Louisville, when I flew in yesterday, I wore red. So just to let you know, I love Louisville too. And Murray, all the folks that were in the NCAA this year, Western. What a great representation. But however, this, in my mind, is the best representation of what we should be about. The idea that we are putting on the forefront of all that we do the needs, particularly of the constituents that we have argued that we are serving. Before I get started, I want to introduce also another member of our council, Dennis Jackson. I saw him last night. Are you still here, Dennis? Oh, there he is. Good to see you. He's a good person. You have to get to know him. We have a member of our CEO, too, Committee on Equal Opportunity, I think he's here. Arthur Lucas, or did I see you somewhere? Or maybe not. But anyway, that's a committee that serves us. Wait. Oh, hi. Yeah. I'm seeing, excuse me? Oh, I know, yeah, Kim Barber. Anyone else that I'm missing? Kim, any of your other compatriots with you? Okay, well, welcome everyone. I also want to thank Melissa Bell and her staff, Wes Holbrook and Jill Compton. They're basically the purveyors of this event, so thank you all for the hard work. So what do we know? When we think about student success and what we know about student success and what we're called to think about what we need to do about student success, we have to look at college readiness. We have to look at our strategic agenda as President King so aptly put in place for us to think about. And we've set targets, and these targets, just to be clear, were set with the campuses. There were a lot of negotiations, and the conclusion was a conclusion that was arrived by negotiation. And these are some of the items that we're looking at that we're asking you to put forth the effort to accomplish. These are the degrees and credentials that we'd like to see increase by 2015. KCTCS is called upon to really be the leader in this associate degree production, and our comprehensive and research institutions with the others. The graduate degrees obviously will fall mainly in the areas at UK, U of L, as far as doctoral degrees, but as you all know now, our comprehensives are allowed to offer some advanced practice degrees, so they're held responsible for some production there. We're also looking at graduation rates, and we understand the flaws of the IPED measure, but that's the measure that is the national comparative measure, so that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the 3-year rate for our community colleges, community and technical colleges, and we're looking also at the items that we need to do within that community and technical college 3-year graduation rate to make sure that all of our population groups have equal the opportunity of reaching that milestone. So we are looking at gaps, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. As you all know, this conference is designed around trying to move the dial a little bit on these matrices. Underprepared, minority, and low-income areas are the ones that we're most concentrating on when we talk about gaps. And let's make it clear, we're not just talking about gaps between the highest group and what we do there. We're also talking about gap to goal. We're hoping to raise the bar and actually accomplish that for all of our population groups. 6-year graduation rate is what we're looking at here also, but you know what's happened with Pell, the idea that you got 12 cycles and after that we're in trouble. So we're called upon to make sure, that's going to have an effect on the way we're doing business. We're called upon to rush this down to a 5- and 4-year as much as possible. And we're looking at the graduation rates here and the gaps that we're trying to close for our 4-year institutions, or our baccalaureate degree granting institutions. Transfer. You know about HB 160, and by the way, the provosts that are in this room, I want to give you a call out that